1867. A 15-year-old boy is crouched in the gravel on the south bank of the Orange River, in a stretch of dry South African scrubland that looks a lot like West Texas. His name is Erasmus Jacobs. He picks up a small, clear pebble, smooth, a little greasy between his fingers, nothing you'd look at twice. He takes it home. His family treats it as a toy. His little sister plays with it in the dirt. That pebble was a diamond, and it was about to trigger a chain of events that would build one of the tightest monopolies in human history, put tens of thousands of men behind barbed wire, and, a century later, reach directly into your living room and tell you exactly how much money to spend on the person you love. You just don't feel the wire because the wire is invisible now. The whole thing was built on a lie so good that most Americans still believe it. This is where it begins. Here's the first thing nobody tells you about a diamond. It is not rare, not really, and it is unimaginably old. A diamond is just carbon, the same element in the pencil on your desk and the soot in your chimney. Squeezed under pressure so violent it rearranges into the hardest natural material on Earth. That squeezing happens more than 100 miles below the surface, in a layer of the planet no human has ever touched. The deepest hole we have ever drilled goes down about 7.5 miles. A diamond is born 10 times deeper than that. And it is old in a way that should stop you cold. Most of the diamonds that end up in a ring formed between 1 and 3 billion years ago. That's not a typo. A billion. These stones were already ancient before the first fish crawled onto land, before the first tree, before there were bones on this planet to fossilize. Volcanic eruptions, long extinct, hundreds of millions of years dead, blasted them up toward the surface through pipes of a rock called Kimberley. And there they sat, waiting, through the entire rise and fall of the dinosaurs and everything after. By the time Erasmus Jacobs picked one up out of the riverbed, human beings had known diamonds for a couple thousand years. Ancient India had them first, panned out of a handful of riverbeds, and for most of that history, they weren't even about beauty. They were talismans. Roman soldiers wore them into battle, believing the stone made them invincible. For centuries, a diamond was something a king owned or a god was given, and the total supply on Earth amounted to a few pounds a year. That's what made them precious. There simply weren't very many. Then came that pebble on the Orange River. Picture the scene the way it actually happened. Late 1866, the Jacobs farm, called De Kalk, sits on an arid slope leading down to the water, about as far from anywhere as you can get. The children of poor farmers pick up bright stones along the riverbank all the time and haul them home to play games with. Nobody in that world has ever seen a cut diamond. When a neighbor named Schalk van Niekerk spots the shiny thing among the kids' playthings and asks about it, Mrs. Jacobs doesn't sell it to him. She just gives it to him. It's a rock. Who charges money for a rock? That rock got mailed to an expert, in a plain, unsealed envelope tossed in with the regular post, and came back confirmed as a 21-carat diamond. The wider world didn't believe it. A geologist connected to the leading museum in London reportedly went on record insisting the whole thing was a hoax, that some stone had been planted, that the soil of South Africa simply would not hold diamonds. He staked his reputation on it. He could not have been more wrong, and the ground was about to prove it on a scale that would humiliate every expert who'd ever dismissed that dry stretch of veld. 2 years later, a shepherd found a bigger one nearby, an 83-carat monster that got traded for 500 sheep, 10 oxen, and a horse. That one became known as the Star of South Africa. When it was shown to the Cape Colony Parliament, one official reportedly held it up and said, "This is the rock on which the future of this country will be built." He had no idea how right he was, or how dark the building would get. Because within a few years, prospectors figured out that the diamonds weren't just scattered in the rivers. They were packed into the ground itself, in those ancient volcanic pipes, by the ton. The scarcity that made diamonds precious for 2,000 years, it was over. South Africa was about to vomit up more diamonds than the entire planet had ever seen, and a small group of very smart, very ruthless men understood immediately that this was a catastrophe. The rush hit in 1871. A hill called Colesberg Kopje turned out to be sitting on top of one of the richest diamond pipes ever found, and within months there was a raw mining camp there that would become the city of Kimberley. Thousands of diggers swarmed in from all over the world, each one working a tiny claim, hacking at the earth with picks and shovels. What they dug became known as the Big Hole, and you need to understand the scale of this thing, because it was carved out by human hands. No dynamite doing the heavy work at first, no steam shovels, men with hand tools. By the time it closed in 1914, up to 50,000 miners had excavated a pit that measures about 42 acres across the top, roughly 30 football fields, and went down nearly 800 feet. That's deeper than the Washington Monument is tall, a quarter-mile wide wound in the earth, dug by hand. Stand at the edge today, and it still looks like something a meteor did. Now here's the problem the mine owners saw coming. When you have thousands of independent diggers all pulling diamonds out of the ground and all racing to sell them, the price collapses. Basic supply and demand. The more diamonds hit the market, the less each one is worth. And if the world ever figured out just how many diamonds South Africa could produce, the entire fortune would evaporate. Diamonds would become what they actually are. A reasonably common, very pretty rock. Semi-precious. Something you'd find in a bin at a rock shop. One man refused to let that happen. Cecil Rhodes showed up in Kimberley in 1871 as a sickly 18-year-old, sent to South Africa because his lungs were bad and his family figured the dry air might help. He started small, renting out a water pump to diggers whose claims kept flooding. But Rhodes had a cold, enormous vision that separated him from every other man on that field. He didn't want to find diamonds. He wanted to own all of them. Over the next 17 years, Rhodes bought out rival after rival, buying, bullying, undercutting, and when necessary, borrowing enormous sums from the Rothschild Bank in London to swallow whole companies. In 1888, he merged with his last serious competitor, a former music hall performer named Barney Barnato, and formed a single company to rule the entire field. He called it De Beers Consolidated Mines, after the two Boer brothers whose farm had sat over the richest pipe of all. By 1891, that one company controlled roughly 90% of the world's diamond production. Think about what that means. Not 90% of one country's output. 90% of every diamond coming out of the ground on planet Earth, funneled through one boardroom. And Rhodes did something with that control that was, frankly, genius and monstrous at the same time. He set up a selling syndicate in London, a small ring of buyers who agreed to take a fixed quantity of diamonds at a fixed price and to release them to the world slowly, deliberately, choking the supply on purpose to keep the price high. He had, in effect, turned off the flood. The world would never see how many diamonds actually existed. They would only ever see the trickle De Beers allowed out, and they'd pay whatever the trickle cost. It was the most important idea in the history of the diamond business, and it would hold for more than 100 years. Control the supply, hide the abundance, and a common stone stays priceless. The diamond money didn't just make Rhodes rich either. He used it to become one of the most powerful men in the British Empire. He became Prime Minister of the Cape Colony. He funded a private army and a private company that seized a vast territory to the north, which was then named, after him, Rhodesia. The wealth pulled out of that hand-dug hole in Kimberley financed the conquest of a huge chunk of southern Africa. Diamonds didn't just fund an empire. For a while, diamonds were the empire. Rhodes died in 1902, but the machine he built didn't die with him. It found an even more capable owner. A German-born financier named Ernest Oppenheimer arrived in South Africa as a diamond buyer, founded a mining company called Anglo-American in 1917, and then spent the 1920s doing to De Beers what Rhodes had done to the little diggers, buying his way in, seat by seat, until he took the chairman's chair in 1929. The Oppenheimer family would run De Beers for the next 80 years, and it was under Ernest and his heirs that the monopoly reached its final, terrifying form. They didn't just control the mines in South Africa, they set up a single global channel, a system where nearly every rough diamond on Earth, no matter which country it came out of, flowed through one organization in London that decided how many stones the world got to see and what they'd cost. If a new mine opened up somewhere and its owners refused to sell through the channel, De Beers could simply flood the market with a wave of similar stones and crater the rebels' prices until they came crawling back. It was a chokehold on an entire category of matter pulled from the earth, held for the better part of a century by one family. But an empire that size runs on labor, and the story of who actually dug those stones out of the ground is the part De Beers spent a century making sure you'd never picture. Before we go further, if you're new here, this channel covers the hidden histories behind the things that shape the world. Real stories, real numbers, no filler. New video every week. Hit subscribe so you don't miss it. And drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. Whether you're in Texas, New York, or somewhere in between, I always want to know. To keep the price of diamonds high, you have to control two things. You have to control the supply that reaches the market. Rhodes had that. And you have to control the diamonds that never reach the market at all, the ones that walk out of the mine in a worker's pocket. That second problem is what built one of the cruelest labor systems of the modern era. In the early years, the men who worked the Kimberley claims, most of them black African laborers who'd traveled hundreds of miles for the wages, lived in open camps. They came and went as they pleased after their shifts, free to walk into town, free to go home. Then, starting around 1885, the mining companies changed everything. They introduced what they called the closed compound. Here is what a closed compound was. Imagine a fenced barracks, wired over the top with netting so nothing could be thrown out over the fence, guarded around the clock. Black workers were locked inside for the entire length of their contract, months at a stretch. They ate there, slept there, and were let out only to go down into the mine and come back up. A single guarded gate was the only connection to the outside world. They could not leave to see their families. They could not leave to spend their pay. They were, for the duration, prisoners who happened to be getting paid. And the searches. This is the detail that tells you everything about how these men were seen. Because the whole point of the compound was to stop diamond theft, workers were subjected to relentless, humiliating body searches, including internal ones, including forced waiting periods in isolation, the company inspecting a man's body inside and out to make sure he wasn't smuggling out a stone worth more than a year of his wages. Put yourself in that body for a second. You've signed a contract because you needed the money. You've traveled a huge distance from home. Now you spend your days 1,000 feet underground in heat and dust, and your nights inside a fenced pen you cannot leave. At the end of your contract, before they let you out the gate, you're stripped and searched in a way designed to strip your dignity along with your clothes. You did this so that a diamond could sit in a glass case in London, so that a price could stay high in a boardroom you'll never see, in a country you'll never visit. The conditions killed people. In the years before the system was reformed, the death rate in those closed compounds ran to more than 18 deaths per 1,000 men in a single year, largely pneumonia and lung disease, driven by overcrowding, bad food, and no protection against the cold. Scale a rate like that up to a mid-sized American city, and you'd be holding thousands of funerals a year, every year, just from the housing. When workers at one mine pushed back in 1894, guards and mounted police opened fire and killed 3 of them. And here is the part that reaches past the diamonds entirely. That closed compound, the fenced barracks, the pass required to move, the migrant black labourer housed away from his family and controlled completely, became the working blueprint for the system that would later run all of South Africa. Historians trace a straight line from the Kimberley diamond compounds of the 1880s to the migrant labour machinery of apartheid. The place we invented to keep men from stealing diamonds became the model for keeping an entire nation of people in their place. That's the true cost of the trickle, not just the low wages, a machine for controlling human beings, refined on the diamond fields, and then exported across a country. Now, quick question, and I want you to actually answer it in your head before we go on. How much do you think the average American spends on a diamond engagement ring today? Hold that number. We'll come back to it, and I promise it'll land differently once you know where it came from. Because everything I've described so far happened on the other side of the world. The compounds, the big hole, the syndicate, that's South Africa, that's the 1800s, that's far away. The genius of what came next was to take this cornered, ruthless monopoly and plant it directly into the heart of American life, into your grandmother's ring, into your own proposal. And they did it with an advertisement. By the 1930s, De Beers had a crisis. The Great Depression had gutted the luxury market. Diamond prices had collapsed, especially in Europe. The company was sitting on an ocean of stones it couldn't sell at the price it needed, and it had no way to force people to buy something they suddenly saw as a frivolous, meaningless expense. There was really only one market left with any money and any potential: the United States. And in America, in the 1930s, the diamond engagement ring was not a tradition. Let that sink in, because it's the hinge of this entire story. Before World War II, only about 10% of American engagement rings had a diamond in them. 10%. A lot of women preferred something practical: a car, a household appliance, actual useful money. The diamond ring you think of as ancient, timeless, the way it's always been done, was a niche product most Americans didn't want. So in 1938, a representative of De Beers sat down and wrote a letter to an American advertising agency in Philadelphia, NW, Air and Sun, and asked in so many words whether the use of propaganda might lift the sale of diamonds in the United States. That decision seemed small at the time. It was not, because what followed was arguably the single most effective advertising campaign in the history of the world, and it did not sell a product. It manufactured a belief. Ayer's own internal strategy said it plainly. There was no brand name to push, no specific diamond to move. There was simply an idea to plant in the American mind. The idea that a diamond was the natural, necessary, permanent symbol of love, and that a man who truly loved a woman would prove it by buying her one. They seeded it everywhere. They got Hollywood stars photographed in diamonds, on screen and off. They sent lecturers to high schools to talk to teenage girls about engagement rings. They planted stories about which socialites got which stones. They built, from nothing, the sense that a girl was not truly engaged unless there was a diamond on her hand. And then, one exhausted night in 1947, it all crystallized into 4 words. Picture her. Frances Geraghty, a copywriter at Ayer, working late in Philadelphia, worn out. And she suddenly realizes she forgot to write a signature line for the next morning's De Beers presentation. By her own account, she put her head down on the desk and said, roughly, "Dear God, send me a line." Then she scribbled something on a slip of paper and went to sleep. When she read it the next morning, she thought it was fine, nothing special. Her colleagues weren't impressed either. The grammar was a little off. The line was, "A diamond is forever." It first ran in 1948, and it has appeared in every single De Beers engagement advertisement since. Advertising Age would later name it the slogan of the century, and it was a quiet piece of commercial genius on a level that's almost frightening, because those 4 words did 2 jobs at once. They told you a diamond, like true love, lasts forever, romantic, beautiful. But forever also meant something else, something colder. If a diamond is forever, you never sell it. And if millions of Americans never sell their diamonds, then all those stones never flood back onto the market. Which means the resale market never exposes the ugly truth that these stones aren't worth anything close to what you paid. The slogan didn't just sell diamonds, it quietly locked the back door so the illusion could never leak out. The campaign worked beyond anyone's wildest projection. In 1939, Americans bought about $23 million worth of diamonds. By 1979, that number was $2.1 billion. It climbed from 10% of brides to, eventually, around 80%. An entire nation's most intimate ritual, the proposal, the ring, the moment, had been engineered by a South African mining cartel and a Philadelphia ad agency to solve a supply problem. They even told you the price, that rule you've heard, that a ring should cost you a certain number of months of your salary. De Beers made that up too. It started as 1 month's salary in the campaign. Later, they nudged it to 2. Later still, 3. There was never any tradition behind it, never any logic. It was an anchor, a number designed to tie the size of the purchase to the size of your paycheck, so that as Americans earned more, they'd spend more, forever. And if you think this only worked because Americans were somehow uniquely gullible, look at what the same company did to Japan. Into the late 1960s, the diamond engagement ring was essentially unknown in Japanese culture, a foreign object with no history there at all. De Beers pointed the same machine at that country, ran the same kind of campaign, tied the diamond to Western modernity and romance. And within roughly a decade or two, the majority of Japanese brides were getting diamond rings. A tradition that supposedly reached back through the ages was installed in a whole new nation, from near zero, inside a single generation, by an ad campaign. That's not romance, that's manufacturing, and the product being manufactured is you. For decades, the world believed this was real, that a diamond was rare, that it held its value, that giving one was a timeless act of devotion. People felt the warmth of that story every time they got engaged. What I haven't told you yet is what the people selling you that story already knew, and had known since the 1870s. If you've made it this far, you already know this isn't the story you were told. Do me one favor, hit subscribe. It's the single thing that helps these deep dives reach more people. Okay, back to it, because this next part is where it stops being history and starts being about you. In February 1982, a journalist named Edward J. Epstein published a piece in The Atlantic with a title that was really a dare. Have you ever tried to sell a diamond? Most people never have. And Epstein's whole point was that if you do try, you discover something devastating. That diamond you paid full retail for, take it to a jeweler and try to sell it back, and you'll be lucky to get a fraction of what you spent. Sometimes as little as 60% of the wholesale price, which is far below what you paid at the counter. The thing marketed to you as an investment, as an heirloom that holds its worth forever, drops most of its value the instant you walk out of the store. Like driving a car off the lot, except the car at least gets you somewhere. Why? Because the price was never based on scarcity or intrinsic worth. Epstein called the whole thing the diamond invention, the deliberate creation of the idea that diamonds are rare and valuable, when the truth, known to the industry since South Africa started producing them by the ton, is that they are not. There is no shortage. There has never been a shortage. At various points, De Beers has sat on a stockpile of hundreds of millions of carats, an enormous hoard of stones held back from the market for exactly one reason, to keep you from ever seeing how many there really are. Read that again. The value of the diamond on the hand of nearly every married person you know depends on a warehouse of identical diamonds being deliberately kept in the dark. This is the part that should make you angry, and I want to be precise about why. Nobody forced you to buy a ring at gunpoint. What they did was quieter than that. They spent decades and untold millions engineering a belief that a common stone was rare, that a depreciating purchase was an investment, that a marketing slogan from 1947 was an ancient tradition. And then they sold you the stone at a price built on that belief. For most of the 20th century, an American couple starting their life together handed over 1, 2, 3 months of hard-earned income for an object worth a small fraction of the price because a cartel had decided that's how it would be. And here's the American twist that almost nobody knows. For roughly 50 years, De Beers could not legally do business in the United States. It couldn't even safely send its executives here because the US government understood exactly what De Beers was. A price-fixing monopoly, the precise thing American antitrust law exists to destroy. The company had first tangled with US authorities over price fixing back around World War II, and the relationship stayed radioactive for decades. In 1994, a federal grand jury in Columbus, Ohio, indicted De Beers along with General Electric for conspiring to fix the price of industrial diamonds. The gritty, non-gem diamonds used in drill bits and cutting tools, a market worth around $500 million a year. GE went to trial and was acquitted. De Beers simply refused to show up. It wouldn't acknowledge that a US court had any authority over it at all, which meant that for years, De Beers executives risked arrest if they set foot on American soil to sell the stones Americans were buying by the billions. Now, the brief here would love a smoking gun memo, some internal document where an executive calculates that fixing prices is cheaper than the fine. I went looking for that memo. It isn't there, and I'm not going to invent one. But the real arithmetic tells the whole story anyway, and you don't need a secret memo to feel it. In 2004, De Beers finally folded. It walked into that federal court in Columbus and pleaded guilty to the price-fixing charge, the first time the company had ever submitted to US jurisdiction, and agreed to pay a fine, $10 million. That's the number, 10 million. And here's why that should make your teeth hurt. That same year, De Beers posted sales of about $5.5 billion and profits around $676 million. The $10 million fine for running an illegal price-fixing operation amounted to roughly what the company earned every 16 hours. It was, functionally, a parking ticket. The price of doing business. They fixed prices, they got caught. They paid a fine worth less than a single day of revenue, and in exchange, they finally got the thing they wanted: legal permission to sell directly to the richest diamond market on the planet. The American market, that at that point bought more than half the world's diamonds. There was a civil side too. Facing a wave of lawsuits from American buyers, De Beers agreed in a settlement finalized around 2008 to pay $295 million, with $130 million of that earmarked for the ordinary consumers who'd overpaid, and to accept an injunction barring it from monopolizing the supply of rough diamonds and fixing the price of polished ones. An American court had to order the company, in writing, to stop doing the thing it had been built to do for over a century. And while all of this was happening, the opacity De Beers had spent 100 years building, the deliberately murky pipeline, the stones with no traceable origin, turned into something even darker. In the 1990s, rebel armies in places like Sierra Leone financed brutal civil wars by seizing diamond fields and selling the stones into that same shadowy global market. Blood diamonds, conflict diamonds, stones cut from war, laundered through the trade and set into rings sold at American mall counters, because the system was designed so that no one could tell where a diamond came from. In 2003, the industry rolled out something called the Kimberley process to certify stones as conflict-free. And in 2006, a Leonardo DiCaprio film put the phrase "blood diamond" in front of millions of American moviegoers. Some critics, Epstein among them, even argued that the industry learned to use the fear of blood diamonds as one more tool to control which stones reached the market and which didn't. Whatever else it did, it forced a lot of Americans, for the first time, to wonder what exactly was on their finger. So let's be plain about what happened here. This wasn't a foreign problem that stayed foreign. The stones were dug by fenced-in men in South Africa. The demand was manufactured in a Philadelphia ad agency. The monopoly was prosecuted in an Ohio courtroom, and the bill was paid over and over, quietly for generations, by American couples who believed they were buying something rare and lasting and true. De Beers knew the stones weren't rare. They'd known since the 1870s, when the ground first opened up and buried the myth of scarcity under a mountain of diamonds. They knew, and they sold you forever anyway, and they kept selling it, right up until the moment something came along that even a monopoly couldn't control. Here's where the story stops being history, because this ending is happening as you watch. For 130 years, the entire diamond business rested on one unbreakable fact. A diamond had to be dug out of the earth, and De Beers controlled the digging. You couldn't make one. That was the whole game, except now you can. In a laboratory, in a matter of weeks, machines grow diamonds that are not fakes, not imitations, not cubic zirconia. They are physically, chemically, optically identical to mined diamonds. The same carbon, the same crystal, the same sparkle. The top gem labs, GIA and IGI, grade them on the exact same scale, because there's nothing to distinguish. The only difference is that a lab-grown diamond costs 80 to 90% less, and no one had to be fenced into a compound to produce it. And American shoppers have figured it out fast. Lab-grown diamonds now account for roughly half of the diamonds in US engagement rings. Half, in just a few years. Signet Jewelers, the giant that owns Kay, Zales and Jared, the names in every American mall, now sells a huge share of its bridal jewelry as lab-grown. And notice who got out just in time. The Oppenheimer family, the dynasty that ran De Beers for 80 years, that inherited Rhodes's machine and perfected it, sold their entire stake to Anglo-American back in 2011 for about $5.1 billion, ending 8 decades of family control. They cashed out at the top before the lab-grown wave hit. The people who understood the illusion better than anyone walked away from it with billions right before the floor gave out. For De Beers, what came next has been an extinction event, and the numbers are staggering. Anglo-American, the mining giant that bought the Oppenheimers out and now owns most of De Beers, has written down its value by roughly $6.8 billion across just 3 years. The company that was worth around $17.6 billion in 2001 is now valued at a little over $1 billion, and Anglo-American is trying to sell it off and get out of the diamond business entirely. De Beers even launched its own lab-grown brand, then shut it down. The cartel that manufactured the desire for diamonds, that convinced the world a common stone was priceless, is being dismantled in real time because a machine can now make the same stone for a fraction of the price. And the artificial scarcity that held the whole illusion together has finally, permanently broken. Which brings us back to the question I asked you earlier. How much does the average American spend on a diamond engagement ring? The answer, in recent years, has been somewhere around $5,000 to $6,000. And notice how close that is to 2 months of a typical American paycheck. That's not an accident. That's not the market finding a natural price. That number is roughly 2 months' salary, because a South African cartel and a Philadelphia copywriter told you 80 years ago that it should be, and you and your parents and your grandparents paid it. Slow down with me for a second, because this is the part worth sitting in. The most romantic object in American life, the thing we hand each other at the single most vulnerable, hopeful moment 2 people ever share, was, underneath, a supply control strategy with a love song bolted onto it. The scarcity was fake. The tradition was invented in the 1940s. The price was an advertising anchor, and the stones themselves were pulled out of the ground by men locked behind wire in a system that became the model for one of the ugliest regimes of the 20th century. All of it, wrapped in 4 words a tired woman scribbled down at her desk and didn't even think were any good. None of that makes the love fake. That's the strange human knot at the center of this. Millions of real proposals, real marriages, real devotion, all completely genuine, all built on top of one of the most successful commercial illusions ever constructed. Both things are true at once. So here's the question I'll leave you with, and I'm not going to answer it for you. How many other things in your life right now, things you think of as natural, timeless, just the way it's done, were actually decided for you in a boardroom you never saw by people who understood something about you that you didn't understand about yourself? Sit with that one. And when you've sat with it, do me a favor. Drop a comment and tell me, did you or someone you love get a diamond? And knowing all this now, does it change how you see it? I read every single one. If this is the kind of story you want more of, the real history behind the things that run your life, hit subscribe. Hit the like button, because it genuinely tells me you want to keep going deeper. And share this with someone who thinks they already know how the world works, especially anyone about to go ring shopping. Because the next time you walk past that glass case at Kay or Zales, and the lights are hitting the stones just right, and the little sign says forever, you'll know. It was never rare. It was never an investment. It was a pebble a kid played with in the dirt, turned into the most profitable lie in the history of love. And now you can't unsee it. A diamond is forever. The story they sold you about it wasn't.